I'm Matt and I'm going to show you how to build a plan in Microsoft Project. You'll leave the session with the MSP templates that I use to deliver projects for my clients and understand why I use the columns that I do. You'll understand the inputs that are needed to build a plan and an understanding how to structure tasks and make sure resources are assigned. Feel free to start from scratch when you're building your plan. However, on the link below, which is a link to my website, you'll find a way of downloading this template for free. There's no sign-ups, there's no catches to it. Simply go down MSP Project Plan number 10 and it's there, assuming that you've got access to Microsoft Project. Firstly, as a project manager, the most valuable contribution is creating a robust plan and one that works. That is how I add value, making sure that the team has a shared understanding of who is delivering what and when is a really good way of building confidence. And having a structured plan that you've worked through with the right people is the only way to do that. One of the points before I give you some broader tips is that Microsoft Project performs a lot of the same functions that Excel does. You'll notice a lot of drop-down features, you'll notice copy and paste, control and find. There's a lot of very similar functions. Aside from formulas, you'll find that it performs in a very similar manner. So, a couple of general planning tips. You shouldn't view the project plan as yours to own. As a project manager, it's a reflection of the conversations that you've had with the rest of the project team. You want those team members to be engaged. You want them to feel a responsibility for that plan. And the only way of doing that is by taking their input into it and not keeping control of the plan. If you do, if you don't allow the team to input into it properly, what you will find is that they're less engaged and they are less likely to take responsibility and ownership, particularly when things start getting challenging. Second pro tip is that when I am about to work through a plan with an SME, I always make sure that the tasks are drafted. It's up to them then whether or not they want to dispute, whether they want to change, but I'll never go along to an SME and say, what are you going to do? I will go along and say, these are the tasks and the order that I think you're going to run through them. Correct me where I've got that wrong. I'll be corrected on pretty much every single time. I'll never get it perfectly right, but it's a good place to start. And the third one, once you've created your plan, arrange a time with the whole project team and walk through it line by line. It's a good opportunity to find out if there are any gaps, if there are any issues, and obviously the earlier that you find those out, the better. But it's also a really good opportunity for you to ask your SMEs or your workstream leads to explain to the rest of the project what it is that they're going to deliver, what they're dependent on, and if there's any challenges that they have. It's a really good way of building confidence and bringing that engagement in for the rest of the project team. So, that being said, we'll jump into some of the detail. So, for the sake of this project plan, it is primarily based on waterfall, but there's a couple of sprints that you can work through. But you'll need to know what that methodology is, and you'll also need to know what your deliverables are and your effort estimates. Assuming that you've got that, we can make a start. So, the first column is task mode. This is really just a sanity check to make sure that everything is set up automatically and not manually configured. The plan is set up by default to have task mode on automatic, so that shouldn't be a challenge, but that's really just a control. Percentage completion, that is a manual task that you will update as you move through the project. So if, for example, the project brief is 50% complete, I will just manually type in 50%, and that is what this column is for. It gives you an overall percentage for the task, the phase, and then obviously the project as a whole. So I'm just going to take that back out. Now, what we've got next is milestone reference. Now, there are a couple of different ways really that milestones are used across projects. Some will use milestone levels, but how I've set this plan up is to use milestone references. And I just use numbers 1 through to whatever the final milestone is. And the reason I do that is that by selecting milestone reference drop down, removing the blank option, I can at a glance see all my key milestones and what those dates are. If I slide across to Gantt chart format and remove summary tasks, I could very quickly export this into Excel, showing what the milestone is and what our target date is for. So it's really for my own ease of reporting. Now obviously, however you choose to use milestones, whether you use level 0, level 1, that is the column or the location that I suggest using. I'm going to start with the project overview. So the very first action that you should complete on here is project information, and you should look to then change the start date to whenever your project is starting. If, for example, I adjust this out to be the 2nd, you'll notice currently our dates are on the 26th. It'll move all those dates out to follow. So that's the first thing that you should do. And then the second thing is change working time. So I put a Christmas break in here just to paint the picture. But if you have bank holidays or days when the business is not going to be operating, add those in and that will adjust around those days. This is particularly important if you are working with businesses, remote businesses around the world. There'll be a lot of different bank holidays, a lot of different considerations, and this is how you input those dates. This is probably the biggest column, but we've got a couple of different phases. So I've got down the phases listed in blue being concept, design, delivery, handover and closure, and you can adjust those to whatever the methodology or whatever the change management framework is that you're going to use. But within each of these tasks, within each of these phases, we've got a number of summary tasks, which is what I'm collapsing, as you can see. Underneath those summary tasks, we've got contingency, stage gate review, and concept stage being complete. You'll notice that I add contingency into the end of each of the phases, and then a stage gate review, and then concept. And I just want to quickly talk through why it is that I've set it up in that manner. Let's say that your concept stage is going to run for 5 days, and let's say that you've got a milestone at the end of it. Design runs for whatever period of time, and you have a second milestone. If you deliver to that date, perfect, no problems whatsoever, job well done. Let's assume that there are problems with it. Let's assume that concept stage actually takes 10 days. If you don't have sufficient contingency in, you have now got to adjust the dates of the concept stage being complete, but also of your second milestone. So immediately you've now got to move both of those dates up by 5 days. Now, it's safe to say there are going to be a number of deliverables that exist within that. So design might have 5 products, concept might have 5, and Microsoft Project will adjust all those dates for you. But from a reporting perspective, it's not a great look to go through and update the whole project with new dates every time a single task moves. So scheduling the contingency is really important, and I always schedule at the end of the phase. And the specific purpose is you're not going to know exactly what task you're going to have to use your contingency on. So using it across your phase essentially covers all of those different products. But if you allow sufficient contingency, design should be starting on the date that you would expect. Now, that is why I choose to add in contingency at the end of each phase. So, the next item that I am going to run through is the task names. So, I've mentioned briefly around summary tasks and tasks below. I'm going to give a little bit of an overview of those tasks themselves, and then we're going to run into a little bit more detail around them. So how I think about tasks is you've got summary tasks in each of those different stages, and then the overview of what you're delivering. Underneath, and that could look like a project brief, a startup meeting, a high-level plan, in design, requirement, solution design, and business case. And when you get down to the detail of it, it's the individual tasks, task 1, task 2, task 3, underneath your summary tasks where the value is really added. So in the project brief, for example, we'll have down a draft, a review, and approve. And I've used this image on the side purposely to demonstrate a little bit of a chain. And I want to talk about that now. So you'll notice that I've got predecessors and successors in these columns. And the reason that I've got that is each of your tasks should be linked to another task. So if I pick a requirements workshop, for example, the requirements workshop is both dependent on the initial review taking place and the amendments are the tasks that are going to follow that. Now, with predecessors and successors, you don't have to populate you can populate one or the other. So if I just remove, for example, line 43 is dependent on line 42. If I take this dependency out, you'll notice a change in this column and this column automatically. So you actually only have to populate one, but what you'll notice is that there's a chain that's being built along throughout the project. And it might not always be a sensible successor. It might be that you have got to link the end of this task. So I'll pick one, for example, communications being baselined. That the communications plan, there's a natural import of that into the business case, knowing your effort, but let's just say that it wasn't. Let's just say that you weren't producing a business case. The end of that task would be the end of your phase. So you'd link it into your contingency and then work through in that manner. So in short, every task should have a predecessor and a successor. Think about this image of an actual chain. So each of our tasks are linked by our predecessors and successors. Now every task should have a predecessor and successor. As I've talked about, it can be the end of the phase, it can be the next subsequent task, whatever that is. But without it, what you will find is that if you're missing a successor, you're missing a predecessor somewhere else. And you'll adjust the date, you'll move something out, you'll amend an estimate, and that will mean that your chain is broken in some way if you don't have that populated, and your plan will have a flaw in it. And it's a fairly easy check to go through and make sure that you've got those dates populated, or sorry, that you've got those columns populated. But it's a really important way of thinking about it, and I always go with I always think of the visual of a chain. The next thing that I am going to talk about is when your predecessors and successors aren't linked correctly. So I mentioned it earlier that these columns link against each other, but I can give you an example. So I'm going to take away business case. This has got a lot of predecessors to it, so I'm going to remove the link between requirements being baselined and our business case being created. There are a lot of other tasks along the way, which mean that there's not really going to be an impact on this date because it's linked up correctly. However, if I were to start removing multiple predecessors and successors, I'm just going to pick some at random, 47, you'll start noticing gaps appearing and dates shuffling around. So if I've got a few gaps and I amend an estimate up here, 15 days for example, you'll notice that the changes only take place down to here. So if you don't have your predecessors and successors set up correctly, it essentially removes a lot of the Excel functions. So it's extremely important that they are added in correctly. Now, stepping through these tasks in a bit more detail, I'll look at requirements. So if I was starting from scratch, I would draft this up and go and work through my business analysts and any of the SMEs who are input into this and say, this is how I think we're going to work through the requirements. Initial draft, a review, a workshop, amendments, sponsor approval, submit to DA, review by DA, DA approval and requirements baselined. I would then go through and find out if there are any other tasks that they think should be captured in there. Now, depending on how much you've worked with that person, how experienced they are, there might be a whole other level of detail that you need to get into. You might need to understand exactly what reviews are involved, if that is a head of department, if there's a peer review, if there's a specific form that needs submitting. But that's obviously on you to determine with your SMEs. But that is how I would structure those tasks. Now you'll also notice that there's a code that I've put at the beginning. So that is just something that I manually type in. And the reason for that is I structure tasks quite similarly. So if I look at requirements and I look at solution design, I've got amendments in for both of them. Now where it generally causes problems is in resource usage. So I can look at project manager in here. For high-level requirements, we've got amendments, and also for our solution design, we've got amendments. Had it not have been for that code added in at the beginning, I wouldn't know where to start, what that amendment's related to. And it's generally in this column that I try and prevent those problems. It's not an issue at the minute, but when you've got a big plan, it can get quite challenging depending on the view. So that's the purpose of that code. Now, adding in tasks is a very similar function to how you expect Excel to work. Let's say that you're building a second product. I'll very creatively call that product B. All I've done is copied the collapsed task. So it's given me all of the individual tasks under that summary task. And what I can do now is control and find. I can go through and replace the code that I need. So product A and product B. I can just click replace. And now I've got a task that's structured, or a deliverable that's structured in a very similar manner. All I need to do is adjust the durations, adjust the resources, and obviously look at predecessors and successors. But you've got a fairly quick way of working through deliverables. So the next item that I'm going to talk about is going to be duration. So I'm going to stick with requirements for now, and we'll work through that. So in our requirements, I would allow 10 days for an initial draft. So I would say to the BA, how long do you think you're going to need to work through that? And let's say they think it's going to take them 2 weeks. I would find out how much actual time they're going to spend working on that. So the way it's set up at the minute is out of our 10 days, the BA is assigned for 20%. Therefore, they're working for 2 days. Realistically, I'd expect that to be closer to 75%. So I would adjust the resource allocation for those roles on an individual basis, working off the estimates that have been given by the individuals. You would never put anyone at 100% because as soon as there's a team meeting, as soon as there's annual leave, some training, your plan's already messed up. So you've always got to adjust it so it's not 100% and that it's a sensible estimate. And one good check against this is work. So what this column does here is essentially summarises the duration and the effort allocated against each. So I can see that there's 56 hours that is spent. So yeah, about 10 days of a full-time individual. Scanning through that and doing some quick maths in my head, that is about 150%, so that works out. Now if I was to add in test lead at 100%, you'd notice that number increases quite drastically. So that's just a good control mechanism. Start and finish. All these dates will adjust dependent on your predecessors and successors. So there should be very little manipulation that you need to do here. However, there is always times that you are going to need to do that. So let's just say, for example, it's not going to be the 10th of June. It's instead going to be the 13th for whatever reason. You can adjust it so that you move the task on and you keep your link and everything automatically moves along. If there was a gap that you needed to create, what you can do is create a lag between your tasks. So there is an option to amend your predecessors from a finish to start. Now what this means is that this task here, review of our requirements, can only be complete once the requirements have been drafted. So 10th of June is completion date. The 10th of June is also when the review starts, which is a finish to start. You can amend it so that these tasks start at the same time. So our 27th of May date, I can amend line 43 so that its predecessor is 42 and that it starts to start, so it starts at the same time, which brings the date forward. Alternatively, and what is probably most common, is a finish to start but including a lag. So if you need to build some time in between those for whatever reason, you can add in a lag of 3 days, and you'll notice then that this column gets updated to show finish to start plus 3 days. Now that lag function works both ways. You can amend it so that it's actually 3 days before the end of the previous task your activity starts, but that lag is a very useful feature and one that you'll find you can play around with quite a bit. So I've talked briefly around resources and how those allocations are actually put onto them. I'm going to pick a big one to work through. So I've got down that we've got a review of our requirements taking 5 days, and then I've got the different resources allocated against that. So I would work with the business analyst to understand how much of his time is going to be needed for those reviews, list out all the individuals that are going to be involved. I'll just take a test lead and put them in for a similar amount of time. And then you can notice that that where column starts building up, which means that I've got people attributed that correctly. Now, the next steps that you'll need to go through, you'll need to think about the different products that you're going to look to create. So in the delivery phase, I've just got down one product, and I'm going to talk you through the steps to go about getting there, just through requirements and solution design. So requirements and solution design. We've got an initial draft, a review, a workshop, amendments, sponsor approval, submit to DA, reviewed by DA, DA approval, and requirements baseline. So fairly granular activity. What we have after that is then the solution design. So drafting the technical spec, review with operation, amendments, submit to DA, review by DA, DA approval. Depending on the format and depending on the document, there shouldn't be wholesale changes to make to this. However, if the build is going to contain more than one product, which I'm guessing it will, there will be a load of other products that you'll need to add into this. So these items are linked into our business case and into our contingency at the end of our phase. And product A is only going to begin once we have worked through our PID and once we've worked through the end of this phase. Now, not all of your products will be set up like that. So when you're copying and pasting, make sure that you're adjusting the predecessors and successors correctly and finding out if any of your products are dependent on each other. There might be a website that's dependent on FAQs, for example. There might be an API that is dependent on a technical change happening somewhere else. So it's important that when you are building out the delivery, you pay attention to the successors and predecessors. Other items that you might want to think about: service management, process maps and training and guidance, communications, what approvals you'll need to go through, making sure that you've got the methodology that is aligned with the business, and any contingency. So they're the next steps that I'd recommend going into, but just to summarise, we were going to look at making sure that you had a copy of the MSP that I use, which you've obviously got access to, and that you understand which columns I use and why, making sure that you understood the inputs that you're going to need in order to create a plan, and then finally an understanding of how to structure the tasks and design resources, which we've obviously worked through. So the next video that I'm going to produce is one to essentially peer review a project plan. So in this exact format, how I go through and check that that's being created correctly. And I'm also going to look to create a suite of videos on an end-to-end project, the different documents that I use, different steps along the way. So if there are any particular questions on anything that I've created, or selfishly, if there are any recommendations that you've got for me, I'd love to hear about them. So I'm here to learn as well. So if you do have any points, any questions, please let me know. If not, I appreciate you watching the video, and good luck building your plans.